So my name is Leon DeVreede, and I'm here with my colleague Nelson Nolan, and the two of us work for the town of Bridgewater on the south shore of Nova Scotia, and we have been apparently doing energy poverty and access to energy work here in a way that interests your network. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak to your network. We really admire the work that CUSP is doing, and the results of the LEAP program are of interest to us. So happy to share what we're doing and hope to learn from your network as well. So I will introduce our project here, and then I will essentially turn things over to Nelson to talk about the energy poverty research that we've done here, and to explain how that research has led to the design of our energy poverty reduction program, which was recently the winner of the National Smart Cities Challenge in the small community category. Bridgewater is a fairly progressive but otherwise normal Atlantic Canadian town. We have a population of between 8,500 and 9,000 residents, and we are a commercial hub here on the South Shore, about an hour and a half west of Halifax. I'm noticing a lot of noise on the phone, and I'm wondering if folks on the phone could please mute themselves. Hello, is there somebody who is not muted? In the interest of preserving the recording, I think we Allison, I think we should try to mute everyone again, because that was I don't know where it's coming from, the noise. Okay, there we go. I think we've solved the problem. Apologies for that. Our community has been working on sustainability issues for the better part of a decade. And most recently, as I mentioned, we gained some notoriety for submitting a winning submission to the National Smart Cities Challenge. So a little bit of information on how we got there as part of the pretext to our ongoing work. So Bridgewater has been involved in doing some fairly advanced community energy planning work. We have identified energy issues as being of fairly great importance to our community from a sustainability perspective, going all the way back to 2008, 2009, when we created our first community sustainability plan. And that has really simply expanded in scope and relevance to our community and our council. In 2015, we began the process of doing a detailed community energy plan, which was completed in early 2018. And that one was called The Way Forward, the Community Energy Investment Plan. This is one of what I would describe as the wave of the latest generation of community energy plans, because it looks at a fully costed and economic approach to energy transition and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Because it has a strong economic development angle, we also received quite a bit of attention for that work. And in fact, we produced a guidebook, which you'll see here on the slide as well, or a guidebook or a toolkit for municipalities to follow in those footsteps. And both of these resources are able to be downloaded for free from our website at energizebridgewater.ca. In a nutshell, what the energy plan is about is shifting the entire community, not just municipal operations, but all aspects of all sectors within the community, toward a low-carbon future characterized by an 80% emissions reduction by 2050 compared to 2016. And this graph shows what we describe as the energy shift. And as you can see, we have a dramatic reduction planned in the use of fossil fuel resources, as well as reliance on grid electricity and the generation of quite a bit of local renewable energy. One of the important aspects of our plan is its impact on the cost of energy within the community, or the community's spending on energy. And one of the most remarkable outcomes from this process is, as you can see from these graphs here, that both residential and commercial spending on energy is expected to decline precipitously as a result of these solutions that we mapped out on a fairly granular level. And that contrasts greatly from a business as usual case where we project energy costs to continue to rise over that same time period of about 32 years. So this was a really important finding from our planning efforts because one of the other surprising things that emerged from that process is this figure here, which is that the annual cost of energy for Bridgewater residents for powering their home and fueling their means of transportation is around $6,500 a year, which was quite an eye-opening figure for us to figure out as we went through the process, because median incomes in Bridgewater are only around the $45,000 mark. So we asked ourselves, how is it that our residents are paying for energy when the median income clearly doesn't seem to support this type of expenditure? And that's really what launched us into a very deep investigation into the nature of energy poverty within our community. So it is that background of working on community energy planning that led us in kind of a roundabout way into finding energy poverty as a means to focus our efforts in energy transition. And in fact, our council and our community became so passionate about the idea of ensuring an equitable transition to a low carbon future that it formed the foundation of our Smart Cities Challenge proposal in 2018. And it was through becoming a finalist and receiving a grant from the Smart Cities Challenge program of $250,000 that we were really able to delve deeply into the topic of energy poverty, and that ended up shaping our winning proposal to the Smart Cities Challenge in early 2019.
So yeah, what I'm going to delve into today involves our findings from the Energy Poverty Research Program, which was undertaken to inform the development of our Smart Cities Challenge finalist application. So I'm going to start with a number of questions that we wanted to answer at the outset of the research program. We were already aware of some of the issues that caused energy poverty in the community as a result of some of the community energy planning work that was done. But we really wanted to go into detail in defining energy poverty, looking at how many households, which households experience energy poverty, and what the lived experience was like from the first voice of residents, as well as working with stakeholders to understand their perspective of the kinds of services that already existed for energy poverty, and how we could build new services to increase collaboration to address it to a greater extent. So I'll start with the question of framing energy poverty. So our definition included both looking at how a household might experience difficulty heating their home and affording transportation. And we also were guided somewhat by a household expenditure metric as well. The 10% of household expenditures on energy after tax. But we also wanted to open up that definition to look at how someone might self-identify as experiencing energy poverty through struggling to pay for energy, access suitable housing that was efficient, and also access different kinds of transportation to essentially complete their daily routine. We also wanted to use a systems lens to look at energy poverty and some of the power structures that determine what kind of energy sources reach our community, who owns those energy systems, and how access is made available to residents for that energy. So in order to determine how many people in Bridgewater and who experiences energy poverty, we undertook a community-wide survey. So the survey was about 8 questions and was sent to every single household in town with the aim of reaching both property owners and renters. And this allowed us to find out energy poverty rates by income, housing archetype, look at it on a neighborhood scale as well, and look at a number of other variables that would help to inform program design. So some of the results that we got, the most hard-hitting result was that about 2 in 5 residents experienced some form of energy poverty. And this was a combination of either having difficulty affording household energy costs or spending greater than 10% of after-tax income on energy or transportation. And so this pointed to a really systemic need in our community for some sort of action. We had about a 16% response rate, and an even higher percentage of households said that they spent more than 10% of their after-tax income on energy. Around 25% of households also said that they had difficulty affording transportation costs, too. So in terms of what households experience energy poverty, we identified renters as well as low-income households, which are often highly correlated in Bridgewater, as well as marginalized community members, especially minorities, seniors, those with disabilities, and young single parents, who often have difficulty accessing housing that might be suitable for their needs. So to investigate a little bit further into what the lived experience of energy poverty is like and what causes it, we undertook a number of focus groups and interviews, as well as long-form surveys. And we were really supported in this effort by local support organizations who interact on a daily basis with individuals who might experience some form of energy poverty, either through needing some form of bill relief or support in finding housing. And this was really an informative exercise, and we really learned a lot of narratives that we were able to kind of put together to understand energy poverty in a really complex way. So yeah, some of the causes that were identified by residents in those interviews and focus groups were that a lot of the housing stock is quite old, especially the rental housing stock in Bridgewater. There's a number of archetypes where tenants felt that they really needed some form of upgrade or support in accessing energy efficiency services, but couldn't find that support. There's a lack of housing alternatives as well, and a combination of low incomes and high energy bills as a result of those causes often put households in a cycle of not being able to afford their energy costs, delaying bill payments, and often having to move dwelling units because they would either be kicked out as a result of arrears or just be unable to afford residing in a dwelling. So the tenant and landlord dynamic was also a big part of the piece that we heard from residents, especially renters. So we found that there was an unequal power dynamic between landlords and tenants negotiating for different sorts of upgrades. There was really no incentive for landlords to make upgrades if they weren't paying for heating. And a lot of landlords themselves have difficulty financing upgrades or knowing what programs to utilize. And this is all really compounded by a dramatic increase in electricity prices in Nova Scotia, which have increased about 90% over the last 15 years. So we identified a number of impacts, really across a broad spectrum. So socially, a lot of individuals who lived in really cold or unfit dwelling units experienced some form of isolation or trade-off costs, which made it difficult for them to leave their home and be able to participate in different kinds of leisure activities. And we also noticed a lot of dependencies in relationships. So someone might have to maintain some form of negative relationship because they might not have another alternative living circumstance. We spoke to a lot of households who had a number of generations or extended friend and family networks that had to live under one roof so that they could afford some of the higher costs of housing. A lot of economic trade-offs had to be made, especially for some of the basic necessities such as food and transportation as well. We also noticed a lot of physical and health impacts, particularly for those who already experienced some form of chronic illness, particularly respiratory and heart-related illnesses, or those illnesses related to circulation. Mental health was impacts and conditions were really exacerbated by difficulty for paying energy bills, and yeah. So one of the key findings of our research program was that residents who have lived in housing circumstances where they've had difficulty affording their energy bill for a number of years were highly adept at managing their situations with the limited resources that they did have. So management strategies by participants ranged from material interventions to strategic bill paying and a heavy reliance on different local service organizations who provide different kinds of support. A lot of the circumstances that resulted from some of these energy management strategies created really unsafe circumstances for residents. For example, building makeshift heating devices in the home using terracotta pots and candles, or creating little tent structures in the home that would provide some warmth if an individual had been cut off from heating. And so a lot of residents advocated for a number of solutions to the issue, and these solutions often came from a place of feeling quite powerless in terms of what they could do with their situation. But a lot of individuals advocated for more consumer choice. They often made comparisons to other kinds of choices that you get in different markets related to cell phones and that kind of thing. More community ownership of energy and services provided at cost rather than profit-generating provision of energy. With better access to affordable, energy-efficient housing, so that energy wasn't as unpredictable of a cost to the household, as well as more options for financing home energy upgrades and basic resources. So in engaging some of our stakeholders, we undertook about 8 workshops on a variety of different themes, from housing and energy to transportation to service organization collaboration. We also undertook about 15 stakeholder interviews with representatives from different service organizations, and the kinds of partners that we did engage came from a diverse range of backgrounds and mandates. So we engaged utilities, social services, advocacy groups, landlords, shelters, and charitable organizations. And this exercise really allowed us to get everyone into the same room and start to talk about the issue, how their organizations are connected with energy poverty, and to build solutions together rather than in silos. So in documenting what the current situation is in our community, we found that energy poverty was an important issue for many organizations. A lot of support services such as United Way that are on the front lines of helping to pay off people's energy bills spend tens of thousands of dollars a year doing so. A lot of outreach services also notice the severe impacts on clients that not being able to afford energy has. Some of the stories we heard related to seniors involve seniors having to cut off portions of their home and use that as firewood to heat their homes. And also the interconnectedness of energy poverty with other issues such as housing and transportation. So a lot of organizations felt that it was important to address energy poverty as a way of looking at a number of other issues. So, and a key aspect of this conversation was redefining energy poverty so that we could build a system that reduced stigma of the individual resident and especially tenant, who is often perceived to be irresponsible with their energy consumption and management. Treating energy as a core need, as housing is treated, and health. Reducing blame on individuals, and also changing systems for energy and housing provisions, which make it so that those who are currently vulnerable and might have difficulty accessing those systems have greater opportunities too. We also learned from engagement that there's currently a lack of coordination of existing services. So navigation support, referral systems, and information sharing needs to be increased. And we need to orient towards long-term solutions rather than short-term solutions like paying off high energy bills. And so we really came to the conclusion that coordinated access would be an effective program design to start to work on some of this collaboration locally. And I can get into the concept of coordinated access a little bit later, but it's primarily used right now for housing support services. And the role that it would play for our program would revolve around intaking individuals who are at risk and them being referred by different support organizations to our program, so that then either their landlord could be contacted to get access to different sorts of home energy upgrade services, and so that we could connect that individual to a range of other services unrelated to energy poverty. So I'll just go through some key lessons learned from our engagement of stakeholders. So we really found it valuable to utilize our existing networks. We've done a lot of community engagement for our community energy planning. And so we have some really close relationships already in the community. Also connecting with gatekeepers to social support organizations. During the workshops, we laid out our vision. We also sought input engaging organizations' clients, which was a really big piece. We also sought to understand existing resource and gaps in the community. We had a really diverse range of partners involved, and we found that a lot of partners ended up creating new partnerships between themselves as a result of our engagement efforts. We also developed all of our outcomes in a really open, shared, and collaborative way, and provided a number of engagement opportunities all throughout our program design over the course of several months, really leading up to the final design of our Smart Cities Challenge application.
You do have some questions in the chat room there, Nelson.
Right. Okay. I'll take a look through to the chat. Yeah. So regarding compensation, that's a really good question. We gave $20 an hour honoraria to individuals who participated in focus groups and interviews. And those focus groups and interviews were around an hour in duration. We also provided childcare and food, especially for focus groups. And that was one of the key parts of working with local support organizations is, for example, Family Support Services, they have space for childcare. So we were able to invite demographics that might otherwise face barriers in engagement, you know, like single mothers, and that sort of thing. Yeah, we provided food as well at most focus groups, which was a really good way to kind of loosen up and make it the engagement a little bit more casual. Yeah. So we've got another question from Aaron. So what were some of the key enabling factors that allowed for those with lived experiences to participate in your engagement opportunities? So that's similar to the prior question. Yeah, we provided transportation vouchers. We made sure that the engagement opportunities were at locations that individuals felt comfortable coming to. Yeah, we also had facilitators, which were trained in a variety of different engagement situations. And so they were really quite sensitive to individual circumstances and in talking about some of the issues. So I think that helped people to open up when they were talking to us.
Nelson, did you use faith-based organizations in any way to convene people or access others?
That's a good question. Faith-based organizations were actually one of the organizations that we didn't have a chance to really engage as much as we'd liked to. There are a number of faith-based organizations in town that provide social support related services. Yeah, we mostly engaged organizations like you know, the Lions Club, Rotary, and the Department of Community Services, yeah, those kinds of organizations. But I think in the future, faith-based organizations are definitely one that we would like to engage. We did find it difficult engaging volunteer-based organizations, primarily because of their limited capacity. But yeah.
You don't make any mention of newcomers in particular or people of colors. What's the makeup in Bridgewater look like? I mean, is that a small population or insignificant for you?
So that's a really good question. So minorities are a demographic that we identified as being at risk for energy poverty, and a big reason for that was access to housing. So at the interface of accessing housing, a lot of African Nova Scotians in particular face difficulty just interacting with proper landlords. And so we did engage. There isn't a large newcomer demographic in Bridgewater, but we did engage second and third gen African Nova Scotians, mostly through our local support organizations. So yeah, if there's no more questions, I can move on. We have synthesized a lot of the findings of research program.
I did have a question in the chat box. This is Glynis, but I can just say it out too. What kind of time commitment was required from the participants in the focus groups as well as in the development of the project as a whole? So I think that I heard you say that it was 1 hour compensated at $25 an hour, but in that time, was it the focus on coming up with collaborating on solutions, or was it more for the municipality to understand the issues that were facing those who were in energy poverty? I just wasn't quite sure about how to, work on solutions together, but not to burden people with way too big a time commitment.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So interviews really ranged in time, depending on how comfortable participants were. So we did about 20 interviews, and we had time ranges from like 45 minutes to 2 hours. And we really started off by looking at just basic causes and kind of triggering moments that someone might identify as being in energy poverty. So for a lot of people, that's just having difficulty affording a bill, which often creates some kind of behavioral cycle of like trying to navigate service organization systems or calling the utility or that sort of thing. And then we really went through some of the impacts that had on the individual, and then also some of the strategies that they used to manage their situation. And then we asked them kind of what solutions they thought would be most beneficial for them. So some of the solutions that were spoken to were highly individual, but a lot of people spoke to like broader community solutions that they thought should be implemented. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, the time commitment I think was made more palatable by the honoraria. So yeah, it's $20 an hour, and then the focus groups, we provided the $20 honoraria, but we also gave transportation vouchers, and then provided food and that kind of thing, and childcare. So just to try to get as many people engaged as possible.
Oh, that's great. So you can really accomplish all of that gamut of conversation in that time frame. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It was like without the $250,000 grant from the Smart Cities Challenge, it may have been difficult to be able to provide that honoraria, but we thought it was necessary to compensate people for their time, and yeah, I guess provide that incentive. Yeah.
So Nelson, just to follow up on that, would it be fair to say then that you use people, your contact with people with living experience in energy poverty mostly for this kind of ground truthing and this initial identification and their initial ideas around solutions, but then you work with the service providers, those frontline organizations, for the design of the program and the application to smart cities more so than, is that who's on your coalition, say, is more these service providers as opposed to individuals?
Thanks, Alison. I think I only got part of your question, but I think, yeah, our coalition is, while being quite broad, is now kind of focused on a number of core organizations and service providers that are especially involved with housing provision. So one of our core partners is Housing Support Services. So they basically help people to find housing that can't currently find housing. But one of the difficulties that they faced is a lot of people that have difficulty finding housing find it difficult because they might have arrears, which means that they would have to pay off those arrears before they're able to sign a new lease. Or the housing that exists really is out of their price range, or it might be affordable, but with the added energy costs, they might not be able to afford it. Yeah, I'd say that a lot of our coalition was built just out of organizations identifying energy poverty as a really core concern from spending a lot on it, a lot of their kind of disposable resources, as well as staff time, to coordinating with the utilities to pay off bills, or to working and on a transportation lens to just driving people around as well, if they couldn't access some form of car transport. But yeah. I'll go into more detail now about how our research findings informed Smart Cities Challenge program design. One of our key findings was that energy poverty has big impacts on residents, both in Bridgewater, across Atlantic Canada, and throughout Canada. And so our design solution for such a systemic issue needs to be transferable, replicable, scalable, and so it really revolves around housing stock improvements at a large scale. Also, changing community energy systems to be locally owned and provided kind of at cost, reinforcing social infrastructure, and also setting up different financing for some of the housing stock improvements, as well as community energy systems, and utilizing community information systems to be able to identify those in need and monitor some of the results of our program. So some of the core outcomes of our program are on this slide, and they range quite broadly from increased mobility to better housing to achieving climate targets. We hope to achieve that through a combination of financial investment, coordinated access, and connected technologies. Housing quality and existing energy systems are really the primary cause that we identified for energy poverty. So we proposed a housing energy management system, as well as community energy systems, which is part of our program architecture. So this slide shows how all of the different systems that we're looking to build work together to form an energy poverty reduction program. And so two of the key components of this are the technical navigator and household navigator positions, which act to connect both property owners and households that are at risk with the services that we're looking to provide. So the coordinated access system really acts as the intake through different community support organizations. So residents can basically go to any outreach or service organization, be intaken using an assessment tool. That assessment tool would identify that the individual is living in energy poverty, and then they would be referred to a range of services, which may include our energy poverty reduction program, which is essentially the housing energy management system. And so we also have a technical navigator, and their role as part of the housing energy management system is to look at undertaking energy audits of buildings, stacking different funding that might be available to make those upgrades. And the coordinated access system and the housing energy management system also relay information to our investment system and our mobility improvement system, so that mobility needs can be identified kind of at that intake step. And then we can plan our transit upgrades and bus transit routes and services accordingly. And this is all a lot of private sector investment is required for a lot of what we're proposing, which really involves like leveraging some of our Smart Cities Challenge grant money, utilizing our PACE program, as well as working with Housing Nova Scotia, which is the public housing service in Nova Scotia, CMHC, and Efficiency Nova Scotia, which provides a range of rebates and energy-related incentives for upgrades to housing, and really looking at coordinating and stacking all of those different funding opportunities. So this takes a look at our capitalization sources, from financial investors to energy rebates. We're looking to set up some sort of independent community economic development investment fund, which is similar to the way a community bond would be structured. We're also investigating a number of different structures like ESCOs for undertaking some of the retrofitting work. we think that providing individual households with tools to better manage their energy system is really important, and that's a big part of the Smart Cities component of our energy poverty reduction program. So that involves installing smart technologies in the home and our energy management information system, which I won't go into too much information or detail on. But here's kind of a general overview of it. It combines data analytics, building automation systems, and IT infrastructure. And really, it's basically a module add-on to our existing town software that has a built-in utility logic, so that there's information constantly going from the household to the town on energy consumption over a long period of time. And also looks to integrate our community energy systems, like a community solar farm that we have proposed, which will combine different kinds of smart grid capabilities. So yeah, and then the coordinated access system, which I've already talked about, is kind of our final design solution, which is really kind of the outreach component of our energy poverty reduction program. Here's a list of some of our partners that we had support from during the application building phase. Yeah, now to talk a little bit about overlap. I think that utilizing Smart Cities approaches and tools are really important for energy poverty reduction efforts, especially enabling households to better manage their energy situations, using a social equity lens for community energy planning, as well as looking at how coalitions can be built from a broad range of stakeholders when you're looking to build these kinds of programs. So yeah, now I can move on to questions if we still have time. Yeah, I went through that fairly quickly, so I'm sure that there's going to be questions. I can definitely share a copy of all of the slides that were produced. We also have a number of other presentations and background documents which provide more detail on some of our investigations into different community financing structures and that kind of thing. So I'll just, so I'll answer a question by Aaron. So building on how will the city be continuing to engage with community stakeholders moving forward? That's a really good question. So part of our application was building a governance structure. And our governance structure proposes that we have a steering committee, which will be kind of at the interface of our project manager and some of our managerial staff, and will provide guidance at different parts in program design and implementation. And so that steering committee will be composed of both utilities to local charities. We hope to even have a local resident who might be experiencing some form of energy poverty on that committee as well. We're also planning to have at least 2 workshops annually where we bring together our stakeholders. We have a number of other communications tools that we utilize. So we have an Energized Bridgewater zine, which we publish around every 2 months. We have a very active social media on Twitter and Facebook as well, which helps people engage. And yeah, we're still kind of figuring out some of the more granular engagement of residents, but we'll likely use a similar model as we did through the research program, which will involve engaging service organizations to then engage individuals that they know are at risk based on having access to the services previously.